The final energy system, the oxidative energy system, can utilize oxygen, obviously, in the synthesis of ATP. And it can resynthesize massive amounts of ATP compared to the other two systems. However, it does it at a much slower rate than the other systems. So while it conveys some advantages, it also has disadvantages. The ATP is produced in the mitochondria by a process that's called mitochondrial respiration. So the reason why, again, we see so many mitochondria found in skeletal muscle is because this method of ATP synthesis is going to be really key to their functioning. This also is trainable. This system is trainable by doing more endurance activity. We see a greater number of mitochondria and an increase in the size of the mitochondria, which is directly related to the rate at which this system can produce ATP and the amount that it can produce. So again, we do see some very significant training effects in the ability of this energy system to do its job. So in the mitochondria, what actually happens is your body will utilize macronutrients such as carbohydrates and fatty acids primarily, and oxygen to break these molecules down, release energy, and then that energy is going to result in the resynthesis of ATP. There are two complementary parts to the system. They work hand in hand, and they are fairly complex molecular reactions, and that's why this system produces ATP at much slower rates. The first part of this system is called the citric acid cycle. If you've ever had an exercise phys class, you've probably heard these terms. The citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle. And it's sort of the first part at which these macronutrients are going to be broken down and energy is released to start the formulation of ATP. The second portion of the process is called the electron transport chain, which is going to utilize some of the byproducts of anaerobic glycolysis as well as the citric acid cycle to further produce an additional amount of ATP molecules. So the oxidative energy system can use glucose, can use lipids, can use proteins to make more ATP. The preferred energy source, if we're working at a high rate, is going to be glucose. However, lipids or free fatty acids can be utilized as well. And at rest, that's primarily lower intensity activity levels. Lipids are the primary source of fuel used. But we can get the ATP out of glucose more quickly. So if we're working at a fairly high energy level, then glucose is sort of the primary fuel for this oxidative energy system. Basically, we need to start with glucose first by going through the anaerobic glycolysis process, producing some ATP, and then the pyruvate, that's an end result of anaerobic glycolysis, enters this oxidative energy system. This pyruvate is then converted to a molecule called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA, I'm only mentioning it because that's sort of the starting point for the oxidative energy system. If we start with lipids, lipids and proteins can be broken down to form acetyl-CoA as well, and that acetyl-CoA is what enters the oxidative energy system. Now, as I said, your body prefers to use lipids when you're at rest, glucose when you're working at a higher energy or higher intensity. It doesn't like to use protein. Protein's typically only going to be utilized if we cannot produce lipids and glucose quickly enough. Then your body will start to use proteins. And those proteins are going to come from your tissues. So you actually start breaking down muscle tissue if you need proteins to fuel your muscle contractions at any significant level. And that's very bad, can lead to a life-threatening condition. Fatty acids are found in muscle fibers, just like glucose is, but can also be extracted from the blood. So if we're doing a very long, hours-long activity, you're going to rapidly, obviously, run out of the lipids and the glucose that's present in skeletal muscle, and we'll need to get it from our bloodstream. We actually have a fairly limited amount of carbohydrate or glucose found in the body. So lipids do contribute significantly to endurance activities, But obviously glucose, we can get the energy out a little bit more quickly, so it's a little more efficient. This is a long duration energy system, and within 5 minutes of exercise, it becomes the dominant system in generating the ATP for cellular energy. The products of this system are pretty immense. If we break down one molecule of glucose, we get 38 ATPs. Okay, obviously in anaerobic glycolysis, we got 2 molecules of ATP for 1 molecule of glucose, but we got it very rapidly. In this system, it takes a while to squeeze it out, but we get a lot more ATP per molecule, but it also requires oxygen to be present and takes a greater amount of time. So this system works very well when it comes to generating large amounts of ATP, but at submaximal rates. The other byproduct of this system is carbon dioxide. So not only do we have, again, the production of this ATP, but we have a waste product called carbon dioxide that's produced that can be picked up by the bloodstream and needs to be expelled from the body. Now, the buildup of this byproduct, carbon dioxide, is not typically difficult to release. It's not a source of fatigue typically. It becomes more challenging to deliver enough oxygen. It does not become more challenging to get rid of this carbon dioxide. While it does occur more slowly, the oxidative energy system is very efficient. And basically, with one molecule of glucose resulting in 32 usable molecules of ATP for muscle contraction. So we get a very big payout at the end of this complex series of chemical reactions. We actually get 33 molecules if we start with glycogen because of that extra 1 molecule, if you remember, that we got from the anaerobic portion of glycolysis. The efficiency of this system also is fairly good, and when you compare it to efficiencies of man-made systems, it fares very well, with about 34% of the actual energy that's produced being utilized in formulation of ATP. I do want to note, though, 66% of the energy that's actually produced as part of these processes does not result in the formulation of ATP, but actually results in the production of heat. That's why when we are physically active, we see a very dramatic increase in body temperature, especially temperature within the working muscle, and why our ability to dissipate that heat becomes so important, because this system produces so much wasted or inefficient use of energy, and it's produced as heat. So this means that when someone is working at a very high rate and the oxidative energy system is contributing a large percentage of that energy, we are at much greater risk for heat illnesses. It's also a reason why we shiver when we're cold, because shivering is muscle contraction. That muscle contraction generates heat. It's a way for your body to try to stay warm. This increased temperature, though, does have some significant benefits. So as we start to exercise and muscle temperature goes up, it does a couple things that are beneficial to the functioning of this system, which is kind of neat. When this temperature goes up, we get an increased rate at which oxygen will separate from hemoglobin, or we get an increased rate of dissociation. So when that oxygen that's bound to hemoglobin in the lungs is then transported by the bloodstream to working muscle, if the muscle is working at a high level, it's going to be warmer. That also makes it easier to get the oxygen out of the bloodstream to the working muscle, a nice byproduct. Also, it speeds up other metabolic reactions. So as muscle temperature goes up, the process of this oxidative energy system can occur more quickly, therefore generating ATP at a more quick rate, which is a nice positive benefit also.